Hi there everyone, and welcome back to the Why Music Podcast, the podcast where we explore different musicians and their music throughout history. Today, we're going to learn about an inspirational woman who broke many barriers for African American women in the 20th century. Today, we're going to learn about a woman by the name of Marian Anderson. Marian was born in the city of Philadelphia, which is the original home of the Lenape tribe, on February the 27th, 1897, at a very difficult time for many in the city. In 1899, the activist W.E.B. Du Bois had written about the mismanagement in the city of Philadelphia and shone light on some statistics which said that black people in Philadelphia at the time were 4 to 6 times more likely to get tuberculosis than white people were. And so Marian, a black woman, was born into this environment. Her mother was a teacher, but she wasn't even allowed to teach in Philadelphia at that time because black people weren't allowed to teach if they didn't have a degree. So that meant at the age of 6, Marian was scrubbing doorsteps to earn money to help support her family. We often hear about supportive parents in some of these stories, but for Marian, not to say that her parents weren't supportive, but it seems like it was her Aunt Mary who really encouraged her to join a choir and to develop her vocal skills. Even before she was a teenager, she was earning money from singing, and her church and her family were really supportive. In fact, the church that she sang at, which was called Union Baptist Church, helped to raise some money for her so that she could have singing lessons and help her to graduate from South Philadelphia High School. They actually called this a fund for the future of Marian Anderson. After she graduated, she decided to go to music school, but because of segregation at that time, as a black woman, she wasn't allowed to attend the Philadelphia Music Academy. She decided to go her own way, and she received a lot of help from the black community in Philadelphia in her pursuit of becoming a world-class musician. At the age of 26 in 1923, she made a now famous recording of the spiritual Deep River. By this time, she was beginning to become a well-recognized name in America, and she traveled to Europe in the 1930s, performing in places like Finland, England, Austria, and Russia, just to name a few places. Now, as you can imagine, in the 1930s, black performers weren't always treated fairly, and often were not seen as being great singers. Even great singers like Marian Anderson could never be seen as being amazing singers by themselves. They were often seen as black people with white souls, as in being black wasn't enough for them to be incredible singers. Now I wonder, what do you think about comments like that? If you're interested in finding out more, there's a book called Singing Like Germans written by Professor Kira Thurman, which explores this topic in great detail. One of the things that Marian is best known for is the Lincoln Memorial Concert, which took place in 1939. The situation was pretty bad. First of all, Marian was denied from performing because she was black, and because Constitution Hall, which is very close to the White House in Washington DC, was segregated to the point where there were not even any bathrooms which black people could use there. Because of this, there was a protest, and many people, including the First Lady at the time, Eleanor Roosevelt, spoke out against Marian being banned from performing. As a result, a separate open-air concert was organised on Easter Sunday, April the 9th, 1939, on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. 75,000 people turned up to hear Marian perform. This is what she sounded like. So imagine, you're not able to perform at Constitution Hall. They set up a totally separate concert so that you can perform. But Marian, in the end, had the last laugh. 4 years later, in 1943, she finally performed at Constitution Hall. By this time, she was an international superstar, and her touring schedule was really intense. But during the time when she wasn't performing and she wasn't rehearsing to perform, she had many different hobbies, including photography, upholstery, which basically means creating seats and padding and springs for furniture, and also baking. She became the first African American to sing with the Metropolitan Opera in New York in 1955, and she published an autobiography in 1956 called My Lord, What a Morning. During the 1950s and 1960s, she sang for President Dwight D. Eisenhower and John F. Kennedy's inauguration ceremonies, and she also performed at the March on Washington during the Civil Rights Movement in 1963. She retired from singing in public in 1965, ending at the world-famous Carnegie Hall. During the last 28 years of her life, she received many different awards, including 24 honorary doctorate awards, the National Medal of Arts, and a Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award in 1991. When she passed away at the age of 96, she left behind a legacy which will never be forgotten. So before we go, I have a few questions for you. Question number 1. She was rejected from music school, she was rejected from singing at Constitution Hall, and many other things during the course of her life. What do you think kept her going? Question number 2. So she was a singer, and she sang many different styles of music, including gospel, spirituals, and opera. She was specifically, though, a contralto. What does that mean? Question number 3. Marian had to travel across the world to perform, but what do you think it was like for her as a black woman to travel around the world in the 1930s without having her own private jet, without having in-flight entertainment and all the things that we might have if we're traveling on airplanes and everything else today? What do you think it was like for her? And before we go, a quick fact for you. Tell me something good. Of course, Marian was a famous singer in the 1930s, but because of segregation, she was not allowed to stay in certain hotels and eat in certain restaurants. So she had to stay with people that she knew, and she actually stayed with a very famous person who you probably would never think was connected to Marian Anderson at all. He was a mathematician, and he was German. Any guesses? No? It was the man who came up with the theory of relativity. That's right, Marian Anderson often stayed at the house of Albert Einstein. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. I really hope you've enjoyed it, and of course I hope you've learned something too about the wonderful life and music of Marian Anderson. Please give us a rating on iTunes, Spotify, and everywhere else you get your podcasts from. Make sure you share this podcast episode with your friends. I look forward to meeting you again on the next episode of this podcast. And until then, check out some of Marian's music. Take care of yourselves, and peace.